Recently, I watched Super 8. I'm going to try and get this ray gun of a microphone out my face. Yeah, so recently I watched Super 8. It's a film directed by J.J. Abrams, who was one of the creators of Lost and also directed the Star Trek prequel, and he's going to be directing the upcoming sequel to that film, which I'm really looking forward to. It's also been produced by Steven Spielberg, and he's been, I think, quite heavily involved in the film. It was also written by J.J. Abrams, and it's a science fiction coming of age drama. The film revolves around a teenage boy called Joel Courtney who has recently tragically lost his mother. So he's trying to deal with that the experience of that sort of tragedy early on in life. He's trying to deal with loss and grief. At the same time, he's also trying to deal with the fact that he is now alienated from his father because his father doesn't know what to do. He's been paralyzed with the fear of loss, and because of that, the relationship between him and his son is strained. His father is also the local town sheriff, or one of the local town sheriffs, and he's kind of thrown himself more into the job of looking out for the townsfolk rather than actually looking out for his son. At the same time that all this is going on, another boy played by Ryan Griffiths is trying to make a short film for a film competition. Joe Courtney's character then attempts to help his friend carry out the filming of this movie. So that's the backdrop to kind of what happens now. They're going around now. They're shooting on this old Super 8 camera, which if you don't know what that is, it's like an 8mm film. And I should mention that the film is set in 1979. So it is a sort of retro film, and it is going to be connected to a lot of nostalgic feelings for a lot of people out there. While they're making this film, Ryan Griffith's character, the boy that's sort of directing the movie, brings in this girl played by Ellie Fanning, who catches the eye of Joel Courtney's character, and they start to get a little bit close, and there's a real sort of relationship between the two of them. So it builds up like that. It starts off. It really hits you. I think it's really brilliantly put together at the beginning of the film, because you really feel sorry for this teenager who's lost his mother, but at the same time you're kind of happy because there's the excitement of your kind of first love, and that's kind of what he's experiencing at the same time, and it's done in a really sweet way. I don't think it's overly sentimental. Some people have claimed that the film is. I don't think it is overly sentimental at this part of the film, and I think that relationship between those two characters is really, yeah, it's just really endearing. So while that's all going on, they decide late one night to sneak out and film one of the scenes for this film at an old railway station. And what happens is there's a train crash, and it's not an ordinary train crash that you would read about in the papers or on the news. There's something on the train, something which breaks out and then seems to be going around this small American town, killing or abducting some of the local residents. So the rest of the film progresses as the kids try to finish their film at the same time as try to investigate what's going on, because the army come in right away. It's obviously something that the army knew about. They had this thing contained on this train, and there's kind of like the maybe a little bit of the sort of X-Files conspiracy theory angle to the film as well. So it's got all of that going on. I won't give any more away because I don't want to spoil it, but there will be a spoilers section at the end of the video. Um, I really enjoyed this film. Now, I've read a lot of reviews, and what a lot of reviews say is that the film starts off really well, but it has a weak conclusion. Now, as much as I did really like Super 8, I have to actually agree with that. I think that I watched the trailers, and the trailers were kind of conceived in I suppose in a similar way to Cloverfield, which was another project J.J. Abrams was involved in, where you only got snippets of little bits. You didn't know what it was about. It was just the film was called Super 8. You had no idea what it was really about, and but it was quite clear from the longer time went on and the more sort of bits of footage that came out. It was quite clear that the I was looking for some sort of monster film, right? So something along those lines, something on the rampage, and from the perspective of these young teenagers. And I went into it. Excuse me, I've still got a cold. I went into it expecting that, but what happened was that I actually ended up really loving the opening of the film. The first sort of third to half of it actually is really fantastic. And as much as I went into it for something that was maybe a little bit more exciting, I ended up just being completely drawn into how endearing the characters were and their situations were and all the performances. By the time it got to the end and there was the big reveal as to what's going on, and then there was a bunch of like action sequences, and then there was an aspect to the conclusion of the film which some people feel was overly sentimental. That it wasn't as good. It didn't live up to the first half of the film. That being said, I still think that the entire film worked as a complete piece. It's just that they didn't maintain the tone of melancholy that's right there at the start of the film throughout the piece. Eventually, there was that sort of, people would probably say I had a Spielberg ending to it. Spielberg got really overly criticized in my mind in the early 80s when people said he was being far too sentimental. And I think the big comparison you're going to draw between Super 8 and any other film is going to be with E.T. And yes, I think the film borrows heavily in some places from E.T. But I don't think it's a case of J.J. Abrams just, ripping Spielberg off. I think what it does is that it simply tries to tell a story in a very simple way with the sort of tone that many, not just E.T., but many of the films of the early 1980s did as well. So I'm thinking of films like, yeah, you have E.T., right? But you also have The Goonies. You had Explorers, which is quite unknown, but a great film. You have a little bit later on, you had Lost Boys. You had films like Fright Night. Um, and then I suppose you could lumber in films like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Um, all those sort of 1980s coming of age films, um, which dealt with it, I think, in a really fun, simplistic way, but without trying to overcomplicate things. Because when you're at that age, you think it is very complicated, but when you look back, you realise that it wasn't complicated. In fact, your life's way more complicated now than it was then, even though at the time you felt like that was the be all and end all. I think that's what J.J. Abrams has tried to replicate, is the tone of those films, what the message that those films used to give out, and I'm all for it. And the reason I'm all for it is that I had a really strange experience watching this film. Um, I'm really connected to the uh, the the films of the 1980s which dealt with kids, exploring their environments, living out dreams, things like that. Um, because a lot of the characters that were in those films, I related to more than any other film, any other type of film, because I felt it was those were films about me, about someone like me, because as a kid I lived more in my head than I did in the real world, and I know everyone did to a degree, but I really did. Um, Making films, writing stories, making comic books for people, things like that, right? but always dreaming of adventures and always telling my friends that we could go on big adventures, that great things could happen. And when I watch those films back now, sometimes I get sad because I think that, I get a sort of bad nostalgia when I watch back like The Goonies and films like that. Because you had that time where you thought about how everything was possible. But sometimes I wonder if the reason I loved those films is because is just because they were there at a certain time in my life. And I think watching Super 8 has kind of reaffirmed in me that the reason that I loved those films is because they were great and they had an important message. And not only that, but as an adult watching a film that is essentially one of those movies but made today, that those films are actually just as relevant for me now as they were when I was a kid. Because I still have that part of me which is, wanting to go to incredible places and do amazing things. So Super 8 kind of reminded me of those films, and it reminded me that they're actually really they're good. They're good on their own. They're not just it's not just a nostalgia trip. And I think a lot of people that have accused Super 8 of being just a nostalgia trip have perhaps missed the whole point. I think Abrams is pointing at the audience and saying, look, Hollywood is awful now. It really is awful. And you know what? Some of the people that I'm borrowing from actually have made Hollywood the way it is eventually. But let's look back into the past and take the best things from other types of storytelling and bring them into cinema today, and you'll find that we'll have much better films. And I think that, just like I felt with the Star Trek reboot, I know I say this about a lot of films, but it had a lot of heart. And I think, Super 8 has an abundance of it. And I think Abrams is saying, look, we can make fun, intriguing, and exciting films, but we can make them in a way that where they are intelligent in a way, but that they have a real emotional gravitas to them. And yeah, so I think that Super 8 is a very good film. The ending doesn't live up to the opening. It does get lost in the end trying to, I think, the problem with it is it's too on the nose at times and it borrows too heavily at times. I think that it should have been a film that took only the best things from that era and added in what is good about today, which is more advanced filmmaking techniques. But in saying that, I don't know what I'm talking about because I prefer the way films were made in the past. But I think there are things about today. I'm saying there are things about today in films that actually should be put into these films, but I'm actually struggling to think what's better today than was happening then. So maybe I've just absolutely shot down my own point. But I do think that it tries to imitate those films of the past a little bit too much. It's a little bit too on the nose, and you wonder how much input Steven Spielberg had because it's got Spielberg written all over it, and it's funny when Spielberg is involved in a film. I don't know how he manages it because Back to the Future, as much as a lot of people really rate Robert Zemeckis, Back to the Future really feels quite heavily like it's a Steven Spielberg film, and he was involved in it. The Goonies, directed by Richard Donner, but it feels like it's a Steven Spielberg film. I mean, fair enough, he wrote it, but it feels like a Steven Spielberg film. Poltergeist, directed by Tobe Hooper, feels like a Steven Spielberg film. Although there's a bit of argument about who really directed that. But my point is that when he is involved, he seems as a producer perhaps to, I don't know if it's maybe that he has more of an input than he should have, I'm not sure. But at the same time, I don't see Abrams being someone who would be pushed around. I think he would go into a project saying, look, this is my project. And I think that he is quite happily went to, I think he's always kind of revered Spielberg and people like that, and I think this was his chance to do something which was a real loving homage to what Spielberg's achieved in his earlier films. Um, the sentimental ending is okay, but again, a little bit too in the nose. But I still enjoyed it. I think the performances were great, and it was fantastic seeing a film which treated children like people. I say children, teenagers like people, because too often do we see films where they don't treat the uh, younger characters like three-dimensional people. We make them too bland in a lot of ways, and I think that this this really managed to capture up the excitement and the tragedy and pain of, you know, the earlier parts of your life, and I think it did it in a really heartfelt and warming way. And you know, I'm looking forward to watching it again because I might warm more to the last sort of third of the film on a second viewing. I think it's just that the original part of it is so strong. Anyway, so go check it out. I'm going to do the spoilers section now, which isn't going to be that long. I'm going to do the spoilers section of the video now. So if you haven't watched it, definitely don't ruin it for yourself. Go away, watch it, come back, watch the video, and watch the end of this video, and let me know what you think. Okay, so spoilers, major spoilers. Um, let's start backwards. Yeah, the ending that I was talking about. So the whole film establishes that the main character, the kid, played by Joe Courtney, has this chain that was his mother's, and it's got a picture of her in it. And in the end, he's standing at this spaceship that's been built by this creature, and there's some sort of magnetic force going on which is pulling everything that's metallic towards it, and he's standing and the chain's being pulled and he's holding it, and it opens up and it shows the mother's face, and you've got emotional music playing and his father's holding on to him, and he lets go, so that's really about letting go. And it's kind of like, I was still a little bit choked up, right? But at the same time, there was still a big part of me going, you know, letting go, literally letting go. That is what the film is fundamentally about. It is about um, learning to deal with loss, which children have to learn eventually. Everyone has to learn eventually, unfortunately. Um, and how to move on, you know, with your life. And I just felt that it was too I don't want to say contrived because that's a little bit unfair, but it was too convenient the way it was all wrapped up. I felt um, it could have been handled more subtly, and it's a shame because the opening of the film is handled in a much more subtle way. Um, I think, and I've just remembered something that I should have said in the non-spoiler section, but there's another reason why I love this film so much. See, I say love this film so much, right? But the first half of the film so much. And it's because of this. It's because it has those kids making films, and a big part of this film seems to be, you know, I think like J.J. Abrams and then before and people like Spielberg and all that, they would get their hands on like an old Super 8 camera and they would film with it, and that would be their first experiences of making films, try to tell stories, learning about framing and composition, and just try to put things together, editing. And anyone who's done that, and I'm sure there's people who are watching this who did the same thing, they maybe had like a video camera, or maybe they had a Super 8 camera. I had a video camera when I was a kid, and you know, I occasionally think about putting some of the films I made up on this channel for a laugh to see what you guys think of them because they're quite funny. But that's a way for kids to explore their environment, explore the world, and to explore their imagination. And for anyone who's done that, I think the film really reveres that aspect of being a child and being able to do it not really for any gain, not to be famous, not to get maybe recognition, but really to be doing it because you're interested in it and you're passionate about it and you enjoy it. So I think from that point of view, that was another reason why I loved the film. Um, I the the alien creature that they used, it was okay. Um, I think some of the action scenes were very well done, but it wasn't entirely compelling, and there were plot holes in the story as well. Like I thought the film was leading up when the alien abducted the Ellie Fanning character, right? The main character sort of had fallen in love with or whatever, right? Had a crush on at that age, whatever you want to say. Um, I thought they had established the whole thing, which was that this creature could telepathically link with a person, um, and could then understand them. And I thought that what was going to happen was that the alien was then going to come for the boy, and somehow messed up in its head have the two of them together with him. I say him. I don't know if it was a he, but it didn't really make sense that the alien didn't understand until the boy explained it and touched him, and it was with his loss and his fear. And again, maybe a little bit too on the nose because he says bad things happen because bad things had happened to this alien creature, and that's why it was going around doing what it was doing. And it was kind of, they didn't really explain it very well where the creature, like, all of a sudden could fly away and his spaceship was ready and he went. Was it that he only once this little boy said to him, it's okay, bad things happen, that he was ready to let go? Was he just there out of anger, or was that just a coincidence because he hears a noise and turns away and goes? I don't know. I really don't know. What I do know is that, and it was the same with District 9, when it meets up with its friends, they're going to be pissed off. Uh, so the alien I didn't think was great, but again, what the film really wasn't about that. But they did try to almost give like an ET ending to the film in a way, and I think that's where they borrowed a little bit too heavily from ET. I like the little references to the film in of itself. There's a part where the Ryan Griffiths character who's making the film says, "Look, I've been reading about it. You need to establish that you need to make characters loved in the first part of the film, and then you care about them later on when things are happening." And we've just that's what we're watching. So that's a little nod and wink to the audience saying, I used to be like this. I used to have a little camera. I used to go around with my friends and make movies. And now I'm making a film. This is a film, and you're watching it. You know, and this is me talking about myself. It's kind of very nudge, nudge, wink, wink at the audience when you get. There's a couple of lines like that. But anyway, so that being said, I think I applaud J.J. Abrams for really trying. I really feel like he tries with his films, even if they don't always come off. He tries, and I think that really should be applauded in today's current climate. When I think the good thing is that he's got a bit of clout. When you get someone who cares about the stories that they're telling, then they can use that clout to make great films. The problem is that most directors have to start off heavily by giving in to studios and having producers tell them what to do. And I don't think that's really constructive for anybody or the film industry. Anyway, I'm going to go now because my throat's really sore. But this was meant to be a 10-minute review. I apologise. I have a massive mouth and I must blabber at you. Join us on the forums below if you want to discuss this film, or let me know what you thought about it in the comments section below, and I will see you all soon. Bye.